Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. Why is learning JavaScript so freaking hard? I've been learning JavaScript for 10 years now, and I'm still learning JavaScript, and I don't think I'm ever going to stop. The reason why is because features change, the language evolves. Things change in the world of web development and software fast. The JavaScript we wrote 10 years ago is much different than the JavaScript we write today. What I want to do is break down a path for you to learn JavaScript. And we've done this a couple times on this show, but I think about this a lot. And the reason why I think about JavaScript specifically a lot when it comes to people that are learning how to code and changing careers is it's really the first mountain that they hit on their path. It's where a lot of people get frustrated. It's where a lot of people stop. It's where a lot of people get stuck and never make it really past this first hurdle. And that's because they're probably just learning it incorrectly. The way you've been taught to learn throughout most of your life, in elementary school, high school, even college, is through a lot of memorization. You were rewarded for how well you could memorize something. In fact, I remember in elementary school, we used to get a reward for memorizing poems. And I was so happy when I memorized a poem and I got to tell it to my teacher and they'd give me McDonald's or something like that. This is, in the 1990s when you could do that kind of thing. I don't think they're handing out Mickey D's as prizes for memorizing poetry anymore. But that whole paradigm shifts when you're learning how to code, because no longer are you rewarded for memorization. You're rewarded for how well you can compose things to make logic work. Let me break that down a little bit. You can read a full book on JavaScript, which I did one summer. I read a whole book on HTML and JavaScript in jQuery. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be so ready when it comes to this boot camp program, which I had enrolled in at the time. And I thought, I'm going to knock this thing out of the water. And I sat down to code at the end of the summer after literally reading these books. In retrospect, it's silly. I mean, I don't even know what I was thinking, but I know a lot of people are probably doing this. I read these books, I sat down to code and said, I don't even know where to start. Where do I write the code? I didn't think about that. I knew what an array was. I knew what a variable was. I knew about HTML elements and the doc type and all these syntax patterns and things like that, but I had zero clue what to actually do to compose a program or get anything on the screen. And I was really defeated by this. Luckily, I learned a way that I'm still using to this day to learn programming, languages, concepts, things that need to make sense to me for my job and my career. Because besides being a little talking head on LinkedIn and saying stuff on this show, I write code for a living and manage a team of developers. I also own Parsity. Check it out. So let's break down how you can learn enough JavaScript to be hireable and the way you need to get set up and the way you should be learning this so you can be a hireable developer, change careers, all that kind of stuff. Don't get stuck at that first mountain of JavaScript. I want you to get past it. I want you to be a confident developer. And here's the way you can shorten your path and not get stuck in tutorial hell or just give up, right? So the first thing you need to do, and many of you are probably ahead of me on this one, but I want to make it clear. Here's some tools you're going to need. Very short list. Visual Studio Code is the code editor you must use. Why must you use it? Pretty strong on this one, right? You must use it because over 70% of developers, according to the Stack Overflow survey last year, use Visual Studio Code. Why is that important? You want to use the same tools that the pros are using. Why is that? Because when you get on a job and you're working with a whole team of developers, what good is it if you know how to use your archaic tool or some cool editor that you heard some guy on YouTube talk about when the whole team uses Visual Studio Code? Just use it. Use the stuff that everybody uses at first, and then go off on your own and use whatever the hell you want, right? Then I want you to go to javascript.info, bookmark that into your browser. So keep a little bookmark for that web page right there. That has all sorts of excellent examples, practical examples of JavaScript, and a ton of information that you're going to read. It's really important when you learn something. You can go to all the YouTube tutorials you want. There is information out there that is like documented, well documented, and suggested by JavaScript to learn. So if you want to learn React or PHP or whatever, right? Don't just start at YouTube. Start it where the actual documentation is. That's going to help you out a lot, because the thing is, when you hear a person like me or somebody on YouTube, you don't know who that person is, honestly. I've seen a lot of videos that go viral, even a video that I have that went viral, that may have wrong information in it. So why just go off what some dude or woman on YouTube says when you could look at the actual documentation that they recommend you look at? So bookmark that page. I don't think you're going to need it at first, but it's really important to have. Lastly, get an account on codecademy.com. Excellent first site to learn. In fact, we even recommend it for varsity students. When they come into our program, we say, hey, you can learn some of the more basic stuff on Codecademy so we can take care of the more complex stuff. And before all this even, you can get all this stuff, right? In order to learn JavaScript, you're going to have to know a little bit of HTML and CSS. How much is a little bit? Can you make a really basic web page with HTML and CSS? Can you make a button? Can you style the button with some colors? Can you make a little tiny form with an input box? Nothing major here. Can you make a couple paragraphs on a page? You don't need to know that much, but you should know some. Why? Because JavaScript pairs with HTML and CSS really, really well. This is actually why I think it has to be your first programming language. People say, learn Python first, learn C#, learn Java. These are great things to learn, no doubt. You can hate JavaScript for all I care, but you have to learn it. Why do you have to learn it? It's the number one programming language in the world. I don't say that as hyperbole or to say that I love it the most, even though I do. It is because it is the most popular programming language in the world, meaning everybody uses it. It's on the web. It's in your car stereo. It's on Netflix. NASA's using it. It's in your mobile devices. It's everywhere you can imagine. JavaScript is there and you cannot avoid it. Also, because it works in the browser, you can immediately get started with it. Using C# or even Python, which is actually not that hard of a programming language to understand, is difficult because you don't get that visual feedback that we really, really need. So learn a little bit of HTML and CSS. I honestly think you can learn most of what you need to in like a day or two to get to the JavaScript part. That will not make you hireable. It'll just make you ready to learn JavaScript. Okay, so what is our goal here? What is the goal of learning JavaScript? Why do you even need JavaScript? What the hell is JavaScript? You can look up at the history of it on javascript.info, and I won't give it to you here, but essentially it's a programming language for the web. It allows you to have interactions on a web page. Think of this. A web page has buttons. It has inputs. It has things you click on. What happens when you click on it? When you click on a button, something generally happens, right? You click a like button on Instagram, you double tap a photo, and it shows that you've liked that particular photo, right? What's going on in the background to support that? How does that interaction happen? JavaScript. Anytime you have interaction on a web page, that's going to be JavaScript. So that's what we use it for, to make interactive web applications. JavaScript runs immediately in the browser. You don't need any special tools to get started with it. In fact, if you look at the browser tools, if you right-click on your browser in Chrome and you go to inspect the page, you can open up the console tab and you can write var a equals 1, 2, 3. Congratulations, you've written your first line of JavaScript. Seriously, it's that simple to get started. Now, the ease with which you can get started gets people into this false sense of security with it. So that's what I want you to avoid. I want to go through the concepts which you must learn, and more importantly, how to learn them in a practical way, right? Because what good is memorizing these things like I did without knowing how to actually apply them? And this is one of the main complaints I hear from people that are learning JavaScript. They say, I wrote it, I kind of get it, but why would I ever need to know this kind of stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I get it. I get it now because I've done this long enough where I see the utility in a lot of these things. But when you're first doing it, it seems like completely just foreign conceptual stuff. So you got your tools, you got the right mindset, you're ready to rock and roll. Here's what you're going to do. The concepts which you're going to need to learn, and you can learn these through javascript.info, are variables, data types, equality or comparison, conditional statements, loops, functions, and lastly, the fetch API. I kind of flew through those, and I hope that wasn't too fast, but those are the main things you're going to need to know to be dangerous and be able to write code that actually does something. So you can go through each one of these concepts. So let's start at variables. How do you declare a variable? How do you write out a variable, meaning the syntax that says, hey, this is a particular variable which is going to hold some sort of data, and that's something you can easily go on javascript.info for. You could even just go on codecademy.com and use their integrated developer environment and begin learning all this stuff. You can take their course, which is a little bit long. Now, here's where I would depart from the course. And this will get us into the way you should actually be learning. using the learning by doing method. So I went through about 8 or 9 different concepts which you'll need to learn. And I'm not going to go through each one of them in detail here because, again, you're not going to learn a lot from me talking about this kind of stuff. I want to give you more of a framework for how to go about learning it, which is much more important than spitting a bunch of words out about what a variable or a data type or a conditional statement is. That's a simple thing to look up. What you need to know is how to apply that and learn by doing. So remember when I told you to install Visual Studio Code? The thing you're going to want to do when you're reading about these things or using Codecademy or javascript.info, what I want you to do is create a JavaScript file, a file called app.js, and I want you to create an index.html file and a style.css file. I want you in your HTML file to have the JavaScript file and the style file, your CSS file and your JavaScript file linked within there. I want you to have a button in that HTML page, and I want you to have an input in that HTML page, and maybe add a couple other things like a paragraph or a div, like a little box, like a green box or something like that. This is important. This is where the real learning takes place. You might be thinking, what the heck are we doing this for? Trust me, it's important. This is the way that I learned, and this is the way I think that you're going to learn the best. We need this HTML page with a little bit of styling on it, because what we want to do is take the concepts we're learning with JavaScript and immediately apply them to this little app. I want you to open this app up in Chrome browser, and with the dev tools, I want you to have the dev tools open, meaning I want the console open. I want you to right click on it or whatever to inspect the page, and I want you to go to the console tab so you can see your JavaScript running in the browser and see the errors and the things that are going wrong, the things that are going right, give you a better bird's eye view of the JavaScript. The console will let you know what errors might be coming as a result of the code you've written. Really, really important, because then you'll get that immediate feedback. Also, when you click the button and something happens on the page, it becomes much clearer what is going on. So for example, when you learn about conditional statements like if this, then that, do something like when a person clicks the button, if they clicked it an odd number of times, do something. Alert them they've clicked an odd number of times. If they've clicked an even number of times, alert them that they've clicked an even number of times. Or let's say they type in something in a box, they click the button. If they type in something that includes the letter Y, alert them that they've typed something that includes the letter Y. If they type in something that includes the letter X, let them know they've typed something that includes the letter X. This makes it clearer and less conceptual and more practical through making these really janky types of apps and saying, okay, here's maybe what I could use it for. And think a little bit about how your favorite apps work. Think about when you click something like on Instagram or you click something on Airbnb or whatever, and it does something. What is it usually doing? Think about when you want to search somewhere. You search on Airbnb for homes in the Los Angeles area. What's happening in that whole transaction here? You type something, you click the button, what happens? You're probably going to pass that data, whatever they've typed in the input box, to somewhere else in a backend. We'll be doing an episode on backend soon, because I think that's an area where people get really confused. That doesn't need to be so confusing. But you can generally get the idea that, okay, you type something in a box, you click a button, and somehow it transmits that data somewhere else that's now going to give you a list of places in Los Angeles or something like that. So build the stuff that you think would be useful to build. Maybe do that same transaction there. Maybe you have a little input where somebody types something in, you click the button, and it just alerts them what they've typed. That could be kind of cool. This will get you in that mode of thinking like, oh, now I see these things aren't so conceptual and just kind of weird to learn. These actually have a actual use case. Then when you get to things like loops and functions, you might think, okay, what is a loop really doing? What do I need a for loop for? An array holds a series of elements or a series of values. What good is that? Think about this. What can you do with an array with a set full of values? Well, you could loop over it. You can go one by one by one, and you could display them on the page. Again, I like to go back to literally any website you go to, Airbnb or like Instagram, one of my favorites, think about what you're actually seeing on those pages. You're seeing a list of data that is basically the same. A list of houses that have a few different values, right? They have like the price, the name, the location. Generally a set of data that is pretty, follows a standard format, right? Think about Instagram, same thing, a picture, the number of likes, comments, the author, whatever, right? So think about, I wonder how that kind of information is stored. it's probably stored in an array. That array probably comes back as a set of objects. Somebody, somewhere, some developer looped over that, and now they show it on the screen in a big list of that same object type. So think how you can replicate some of this stuff with the general knowledge you have. And think, okay, I get it now. Now I'm making these things work. And you keep building and building and building upon this stuff. This is where a little bit of your creativity has to come into play. You need to think, okay, cool. I learned this little thing. What can I do to apply that? What if I click the button and the button color changed? What if I clicked the button and I don't know, the page just went all black? Just go crazy on it. This is the way you learn. You learn by having a little bit of curiosity and taking what you know and then applying it and then finding where the depth of your knowledge is and then looking for how to fill in that gap. That is the best way and the only way, in my opinion, to learn. So now you have Visual Studio Code, JavaScript.info to fill in that knowledge and get those knowledge gaps, Codecademy to get you started. And you should be writing all this code in Visual Studio Code with your HTML, CSS, and JS files. By the way, I've done a lot of this work for you. So as a little gift to you, being an awesome looking listener, like I know the listeners of this show are, I've included in the show notes a couple resources that are not advanced, but they're not super beginner. These are ones that are going to stretch you a little bit if you're just learning how to write JavaScript that you're going to need to run within Visual Studio Code. It'll have a little bit of background info on the concept and then a little exercise to prove to yourself that you actually know how to use it in a practical way. This is what I think is a pretty cool way to learn. And if you really want to dive into learning JavaScript the right way, I would just join us at dev30.xyz. That's dev30.xyz. I talk about it at the end of this show. It's 30 days of working on JavaScript in a community of people. We have a director of engineering who actually helps with the projects and has live sessions, which is kind of nuts considering the really low price we offer for it. It's a great program. It also gives you a huge discount to Parsity. To me, it's a no-brainer. I don't know why anybody wouldn't join it, but yeah, consider it if you want to learn in a group of people, because learning in a group generally means that you're going to have better success rate, right? Because when you're in a group, you feel that little bit of pressure to keep going. You also have somebody kind of poking at you, telling you, hey, we're going to learn this today. We're going to do this today. And instead of just going out on your own and kind of going all over the place and doing it. So that's, in my opinion, the best way to learn. And at the end of this whole exercise of learning JavaScript, you can learn JavaScript for a really, really long time. Lord knows I've been learning it for 10 years and I'm going to keep learning it. Just because it changes a lot. So instead of getting stuck in some long, never-ending learning loop, I want to just give you a project that I think you should be able to build. So maybe this will help you reverse engineer what you should learn in order to be able to build. Because what you really want to do is use JavaScript as a stepping stone to get to something like React, because that is what people hire for. People are less and less hiring for JavaScript developers. They are hiring React developers, Angular developers, Vue developers, maybe. I don't know. I always talk trash on Vue. Don't take me seriously. But React is the most popular framework out there. It's why we teach it at Parsity. It's the thing that you're going to use at some point in your career. React has almost become synonymous with JavaScript at this point, which is a good thing, bad thing? I don't know. It's the reality. So in order to learn that kind of JavaScript, to get to that stage where you can finally learn React, so here's the two projects I think you should be able to build. So you should be able to build a form. That form, when filled out, have a few fields in there, including a drop down or something like that. When a person presses submit, it should call a third-party API and transmit that data to that third-party API using the window.fetch method. That was a lot of words right there, but that is what you should be able to build to make sure that you have enough JavaScript knowledge to be dangerous. On top of that, you should be able to request data from a third-party API, and you can go to Fake Store API. There is Placeholder API. There's a few free and like quote unquote fake APIs out there, which mimic the methods that would be on a quote unquote real API that you can use for the purposes of this exercise. So you should be able to request the data, display it on the screen in a list, and that data should be able to be searched and filtered, and finally, for bonus points, saved to local storage. Those are the two projects that I think are going to make sure that you feel confident. You say, okay, cool. If you can build those two things, you're ready to move on to React. Now, if you can't, I think it shows you places where you need to probably go back and fill in those JavaScript knowledge gaps. And that way you also are going towards a faster path towards learning React and other things like that. And you could basically rebuild these same exact projects with React and Next.js. At a place like Parsity, we build this and way more in vanilla JavaScript, and we redo some of these things within React using Next.js and even TypeScript, because that's the way we think people learn the best. In fact, we know it's the way people learn the best. It's the way I've been learning it. It's the way people like John Cricket, a guy who's been doing this for 25 years, has been learning this. This method is not some unique method, by the way. This is a thing that every good developer I've met uses. So instead of watching a million more YouTube videos or going out and trying to find the perfect book on the subject, learn by doing. I've given you an opinionated list of things, and go down in the show notes where I have some more resources which I think are going to help you out. And lastly, join dev30.xyz and learn JavaScript from the pros. See ya. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out Parsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.